Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to more Warhammer Fantasy lore, where today we're going to have a look at a creature that might have fit in very well in a Beasts of the Old Worlds video, and yet simultaneously is a bit too organized, structured, relatively speaking at least, to not quite fit the definition of beast, no matter how evil and savage the Fimir may be. As they are bog-dwelling creatures, they can principally be found along the southern coasts of Norska, the western stretches of Kislev, and the northern and western parts of the Empire. They can also occasionally be found in Bretonnia as well. But despite their proclivities for coastal regions, the Fimir can also theoretically be found deeper inland, in sizable bogs, usually in areas that has had previous human settlements, and within a day or two at most march away from current human population centers, for grotesque reasons that we will revisit later. For now, however, wherever the Fimir may be found, you can rest assured that local authorities tend to take a rather proactive approach to their extermination, which, unfortunately, often proves quite difficult, for the very reason why this is not a Beasts of the Old World video. For whilst in many respects, the Fimir might easily be mistaken for one of the countless predatory species that infest the old world, what sets them apart is their organization. The Fimir have a distinctly structured society, complete with warriors, nobles, mages, and slaves, all with their own parts to play in maintaining the health of the clan. These roles, incidentally, are assigned at birth. There is no social mobility within a Fimir clan. Even their rulers are chosen at birth, as this is not a community created via natural evolution. The Fimir are not normally social creatures and thus seek together. Instead, this is more of a survival method, or alternatively, something significantly more malicious, as the Fimir are far closer to the Beastmen's forcibly organized tribal society as servants of chaos than they are to organically fashioned human communities. Yet, the Fimir are not, outright at least, creatures of chaos, though they do have a close connection to demonic entities, which is another thing we will revisit in but a moment. But first, let's talk about the castes of Fimir society, beginning with the lowest of the low, the natural-born slaves, the Shearl. To the casual observer, this servant caste would not appear to be strikingly dissimilar to others of its kind, possessed as it is of a large, pointed, almost turnip-like hairless head, into which is set one single large eyebrow, protected by a heavy brow. The body itself is humanoid enough in appearance, but the arms are unusually long, almost dragging into the muck, and the feet as well are large, with 3 clawed toes. And as if to put paid to any illusion that this could be a human being, finally the Fimir is possessed of a long tail. And this is where a more experienced observer would be able to point out the differences between the castes, as the servants have a long, smooth, and otherwise featureless tail. The underclasses also tend to be, if not significantly, then slightly smaller than the rest of the clan, though whether or not this is due to the way they are born, or A simple lack of nutrients is unknown. The next step on the social hierarchy are the warriors, the professional fighters. There is no such thing as a civilian in Fimir society. You are either a slave or a fighter. Simple as. And thus, the vast majority of the nobility also belongs to the second warrior class. They are referred to as the Fim, and it is from them that the race as a whole draws its name. They are larger and stronger than the thrall class, but again, the most prominent feature is the tail. Whereas that of the thrall is smooth and featureless, the ones of the warriors end in gnarled, mace-like tips, often viciously spiked. In fact, the number of spikes and/or protrusions is seen as a sign of status, but the most desired variant of all is a large, flattened bone blade, much like a meat cleaver at the end of one's tail. This is a sign of a noble birth, and the larger the cleaver, the more privileged the person. But the Fim nobility are not the leaders of the clan. They are merely its officers and warband leaders. They are the ones that lead groups of Fim warriors and Sheryl thralls out from the bogs to raid human settlements. When they do this, however, they are almost always accompanied by a member of a third caste, the Diarch, or demon friends. They are noticeably smaller than either the Fim or the Sheryl, but they are possessed of two great horns on their heads, as well as innate magical abilities. They are very rare, and most clans will only have a few Diarchs. They will accompany any major raid out of the bogs, in particular, due to their ability to summon the rolling mist that seemingly surround the Fimir wherever they go. This mist is crucial to the Fimir, as without it they will swiftly begin panicking. They hate, loathe, and fear the open sun. They are also massively disadvantaged should they be encountered in daylight conditions. Their single large orb eye has terrible depth perception, and they use the way the fog moves and shifts around the victim, along with how clearly they can perceive them, as a way of judging distance. A Fimir warband encountered without their shrouding fog will thus be easy pickings for all but the most inexperienced of troops, this despite their tremendous strength, as the Fim are the primary fighting power of these warbands. The Diarch may be powerful, indeed he is a formidable magician, but a significant portion of his power will be continuously dedicated to summoning and controlling the fog, meaning that the fighting and the raiding needs to be done by the Fimir. The Sheryls, the thralls, will usually be sent in as cannon fodder, pure and simple. They are there to eat the munition otherwise intended for the Fim warrior class. They are there to surround and overwhelm enemies, and they are there to slow down particularly heroic individuals so the Fim can get a good strike in on them. And one hit will usually do it. The Fim wield even two-handed weapons in one hand with utter ease, and can deliver bone-crushing blows more than enough to cripple your average protected warrior. Now, the Fim are hardly graceful, nor are they possessed of much in the way of martial finesse, and so a skilled warrior may very well be able to fend off their blundering approach, but many a fighter has grown overconfident and been caught out by the ace up the Fimir's sleeve. or the tail up their skirt more correctly, as the long, sinuous tail is a weapon just as dangerous as those wielded in either hand. And unless the defender is used to dealing with critters possessed of prehensile tails, a swift and unexpected blow to a shin or an ankle can quickly prove fatal, as the temporary imbalance is made rather more permanent by a descending axe blow. Add to this as well the fact that when encountering a Fimir, it will almost always be within the thick, dense, roiling fogs that they prefer, and they are dangerous adversaries. On the positive side, they are again possessed of very little in the way of true martial intelligence. They are not going to be using any formation more complicated than herding their thralls forward ahead of the warrior caste. Neither are they going to actively fight together in mutual support, and are therefore very weak against enemies that manage to retain the advantage of formation, or that are able to fight in coordination with one another, utilizing in particular long weapons like spears or halberds, for example. But the Fimir would rather avoid such enemies altogether. The Fimir raids are not there to expand their territory. They have no interest in anything outside their bogs, and so taking on trained troops is risky and pointless to them. They target civilian communities, creeping up in the dead of night, utilizing their near-perfect dark vision and the fog as a seemingly naturally occurring phenomenon. No one's going to be too alerted by some fog coming out of the bog during the night, after all. And by the time Fimir axes are hammering loose at gates and walls, it is already far too late to flee. Obviously, those communities that have spent their times around the bogs a little bit longer than others are going to be particularly wary of sudden fog. But for many, this will be the do or die moment, as the Fimir start to break in through whatever fortifications the village has created. And there will almost certainly be fortifications. Neither the Empire or Kislev have any fondness for undefended villages, and natural selection ensures they rarely remain undefended for long, or villages for that matter. Bretonnia has a bit of a different culture, and you can see a great deal of undefended villages there, but those are also usually within short distance of a Bretonnian keep, filled with men-at-arms and knights of the realm. And their lack of military sophistication notwithstanding, this is a fact that the Fimir are aware of. The greatest danger to their raiding parties are not the villagers. It is a military response from nearby garrisons, as the predations of Fimir bands tend to be viewed as a very serious danger by all local forces. This means that the Fimir will employ mostly smash and grab tactics, where they break into a village quickly, batter down whatever doors they can, kill the men, grab the women, and steal anything of value they can carry. Mostly this is items made of metal that they can be smelted down, or precious stones to be used for decorations. Gold is of lesser value to them, as they prefer silver or precious stones, garnets in particular. But anything like a weapon, or iron tools, or utensils, or even cooking pots will be greedily stolen and turned into makeshift weaponry and armor. As for the women they steal, they are by far the most important and significant booty the Fimir can acquire. For you see, virtually all Fimir are males, and even the few females that do exist are incapable of breeding. meaning that the species is incapable of reproducing, unless it is with a human female. These valuable prizes are therefore dragged back home, deep into the bog, where the Fimir will invariably establish a base camp. These strongholds, although they are hardly deserving of the name, will usually simply be massive piles of rocks, haphazardly gathered up, stacked together and placed on top of one another to form extremely crude shelters. The most ambitious of tribes might even try to pile up stones surrounding the encampment as a sort of perimeter wall. These fortifications are invariably simplistic and would not pose much in the way of challenge even to a citizen militia. But then again, these are not the true defences of the camp. The miles and miles of dirty, filthy, disease-infested bogland and the constant rolling, confusing fog. That is the Fimir's true defense. This is also why I mentioned that the Fimir would prefer areas previously occupied by humans, as they love nothing more than occupying old, abandoned fortifications. The women are then tied up and, well, I think you can probably imagine what happens next. Nothing YouTube friendly, let's simply leave it at that. As fresh generations of Fimir are born. Around half and half will be thralls and warriors. A much smaller percentage again will be nobles. Only a tiny handful will be diarchs, and very, very, very rarely, only once in a generation or two, will a Mirg be born. These are the matriarchal leaders of the Fimir. Each clan is led by a single witch queen, a bog witch. They are the only female Fimir, and incidentally, all offspring are always Fimir. They are never half-breeds, and they are never humans, certainly. Usually, when a Mirg is born, the child is immediately killed. Usually with the first and best rock that comes to hand. As they are always the leaders of the clan, having two Mirgs in a clan would inevitably lead to dispute. Only when the ruling matriarch is reaching the end of her long life cycle will one be allowed to live and serve as the Mirg matriarch's replacement. And seeing as they have a lifespan of upwards of 2,000 years, this is a rarity indeed. And I am sad to say that the misfortune of the womenfolk captured doesn't even end there, as this is old school Games Workshop lore, back in the day when a grim and dark universe like Warhammer was, well, grim and dark. When their use for procreational purposes is done with, they will usually be handed over into the care of the Diarchs, who are, as mentioned, friends to Deamons. And we all know the kind of currency Deamons deal in, don't we? As the Diarchs will create various pacts and treaties with these otherworldly entities. Mostly, again, with minor demonic creatures, lesser demons, or favors or blessings or visions, the locations of nearby villages whose menfolk may be away, serving in the citizen militia, for example, or who have had a bountiful harvest and might therefore provide the Fimir with a bumper crop of loot. On some occasions, with a significant enough sacrifice, demons can even be enticed to fight alongside the Fimir, giving them valuable shock troops and potentially even improvised siege weaponry, depending upon the nature of the demonic creature in question. Yet again, however, the Fimir themselves are not, at the very least not obviously, creatures of chaos. They are not beastmen who are inherently and automatically servants of the dark gods. The Fimir certainly have a far closer relationship to chaos than is healthy for any normal being, but they are not inherently its servants. I say inherently because they are, on occasion, just that, though this tends to be the result of some form of a pact, as the Fimir have been known to worship demonic entities, or possibly even the gods themselves outright, though I imagine the ruling matriarch will usually fill the role of guiding spiritual entity, as they tend to guard their power and authority with extreme jealousy. I would, however, be remiss in my duties as a scholar of the Empire if I did not also mention that there are competing theories around the nature of the Fimir's relationship with chaos. There are those who claim that the Fimir were once one of the original worshippers of the ruinous powers, that in the long-forgotten days they were one of Chaos's only worshippers, long before the rise of men and even elves or dwarves to the center stage of history, but that the Fimir were abandoned due to the fickle nature of the gods in favor of the more vibrant species, and that now the Fimir labor forever tirelessly in an attempt to aid their chaotic masters in such a way as to regain the favor they had once lost. The theory holds some plausibility, no doubt, but it would seemingly appear to be undermined by the fact that the Fimir are not a very ambitious folk. By and large, clans will live out their entire lives in a single bog, making few, if any, attempts to expand their domains, and certainly a Fimir military campaign has rarely, if ever, been recorded. There are suggestions that they have quarrelled on occasion with the mythical rat men of the underworld, but this too is difficult to prove, and in any such confrontation there can truly only be one winner, considering the disparity in numbers. The exact truth is, of course, as always, difficult to discern. Cough. Games Workshop forgetting their own setting, cough. But it is the opinion of this humble scholar, at least, that the Fimir are far more interesting as a natural, predatory part of the old world, as vicious creatures dwelling in the bogs, as a monster, a piece of the larger fabric of the fantasy world, as a unicum, rather than simply as yet another chaos-connected subfaction. But hey, just my humble opinion that the world should be more than just the bad guys and the good guys. Speaking of, how would our heroes, the humans, deal with the Fimir? Well, obviously, with violence. With copious amounts of violence. Coexistence is not an option here, but as mentioned, the Fimir are a bit on the crafty side of things. So how would, say, the Empire deal with a Fimir settlement? Well, depending upon whether it is inland or on the coast, the answer will differ in terms of the delivery of the Empire troops, but discovering it would still rely on local expertise and guides. In either scenario, the village will be protected by dense fog, and from a distance, it will appear to be nothing more than a natural rock formation. Or possibly a long-abandoned fort. There are countless such fortifications up and down the coast of the Empire, some of human origin, from back in the day when the humans themselves were little more than savages living in the woods and coastal regions, to elven fortresses, or even dwarven long-abandoned holdfasts. These are usually viewed with extreme suspicion and superstition by the local populace, and militia forces would need a very good reason to get close to one of these places, and probably the presence of a warrior priest or two. Finding a coastal stronghold would also be complicated by other factors. The Fimir, despite low, and I do mean low, general intelligence, do know enough to make simple, flat-bottomed long barges, really. They're not going to be seaworthy by any stretch of the imagination, but they will allow them to transport themselves relatively effectively along flooded lakes or bogs. And of course, tracking a boat is very, very hard. Whereas in a mainland bog, which may not be filled with water to the extent where these barges will be practicable, a decent-sized Fimir warband of a dozen or two individuals could, with local expertise, be tracked down. Though the Fimir will make every effort to conceal their tracks as, again, low intelligence notwithstanding, they're aware of what happens if their home is ever discovered. And it really is finding the place that is the biggest difficulty. Considering, again, the Fimir's lack of expertise when it comes to the defensive arts of siege working, once their stronghold has been located, overthrowing it is by far the easier part, presuming that a decent-sized formation can be moved through the bog and to the stronghold, that is. The Fimir, they live here, they breathe the boglands. They are resistant, if not straight-up immune, to all of its countless diseases. The humidity and the constantly sucking ground is no impediment to them whatsoever. But to a formation of Empire State troops, possibly in armor, carrying equipment, weapons, armor, supplies, the bog itself can be as daunting an enemy as the Fimir. But, yet again, if they actually manage to get there, the fight itself may be surprisingly easy, or surprisingly difficult depending on. Fimir communities tend to be quite small. A couple dozen members, 20, 30, 40, 100 Fimir at the absolute most. This is due to the simple fact that they are entirely reliant on human societies to raid, The Fimir themselves have no knowledge at all of agriculture. They are mediocre hunters at best, and whilst they clearly know the boglands themselves quite well, and would be able to forage fairly effectively, there is still a pretty hard limit on how many such individuals you could sustain in such an area. And even if we assume one of the larger groups of up to 100 members, there will only be one, possibly two Diarchs, and of course only one Witch Queen. Out of the total number, less than half will be warriors. A significantly smaller percentage of that again, maybe only 4 or 5, will be well-equipped nobles with chainmail armor and decent weaponry. The rest of the warriors will be wearing simple crude iron armaments and protection, mostly only for the torso and possibly for the head. The slave classes will be herded into the fight as well, but they will be armed with sticks, clubs, rocks, and armored with animal hide or possibly the shell of creatures indigenous to the bog. And as far as equipment goes, the Fimir have another major disadvantage, in that they possess no ranged weaponry whatsoever, not even simple projectiles like thrown spears or javelins or even just heavy rocks. Thus, enemies armed with ranged weapons, be it state troops with crossbows or hunters with bows, they would be at a significant advantage over the Fimir, even more so if they could seek refuge within or next to formations of organized state troops with spears or halberds. Were it just dealing with the Fimir warriors and their slaves alone, 20, 30 decently drilled and organized men would probably be more than enough. But the magic does add in a potential complication to the mix. Even a single Diarch calling forth demonic creatures to fight alongside the Fimir is going to put even disciplined and proper state troops to the test, as they will need to be able to stand in the face of a creature crafted literally from their worst nightmares, and a creature that in many cases will be very resistant or even outright immune to their weaponry. The magic cast by the Diarch as well, and the Witch Queen herself, is also absolutely lethal. Being able to boil a man's blood and have it explosively evict itself throughout every pore in their body, causing yet further strain on the men's morale. A successful expedition against the Fimir stronghold is thus more of a question of leadership than it is necessarily numbers. A good commander who's taken precautions to deal with these casters, for example by placing out sharpshooters with crossbows, or simple bows, or maybe even flintlocks, if they can be kept operational in the far from ideal boggy conditions, can easily dispatch a Diarch or even a Mirg with a single well-aimed quarrel. A good warrior priest as well can defend a body of men against vile sorcery, and an experienced mage, if such a rare companion can be found, would outclass your average Diarch or Mirg significantly. They cast magic through simple, instinctual, natural understanding, with no true, deep fathom of what they're doing. No match for a college-educated wizard. At the same time, however, they should not be underestimated, for whilst even the Matriarchs lack much in the way of organizational understanding or human recognizable intellect, they do have the feral low cunning of predatory animals. And as the Fimir will be fighting on their home turf, should the expedition go awry, or it be ambushed in a thick fog, or fall prey to simple yet effective traps, then more than likely not a single man of it will ever see his home ever again, making it a serious risk to venture off into the swamps to deal with the threat of the Fimir. But considering the significant damages that they can do to local communities should they be left unchallenged, it may very well be worth it. Though it could also easily be argued that due to the fairly small size of Fimir camps, simply strengthening the defenses of exposed villages may be a far more economic solution. A halfway decent palisade, manned by a few state troopers with skill at the use of ranged weapons, would be a serious deterrent to nearly any Fimir raiding party. Then again, surrendering the initiative to a species known for summoning demons, that has its fair share of challenges as well. And we can count ourselves lucky that this is not a predicament that any of us are likely to encounter any time soon. And so, I bid you adieu yet again, and hope that you've learned something new about the bog-dwelling Fimir. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.